we wait until we find the key. I don't know the answer, but one thing I'm sure of, it all begins with me. When people are homeless, then we must give them shelter. If people are sick, then we must find the cure. When people are hungry, then we must help to feed them. In spite of our wealth, there are poor. We must help the poor. Why in the world are people going hungry? Why in the world isn't everybody free? I don't know the answer, but one thing I'm sure of, it all begins with me. It all begins with me. It all begins with me. With me. Thank you.
Thank you, Shar, so much. It's so good to have you here today with us. Thank you for sharing your music. Well, welcome, everybody. It's really good to see all of you. I always enjoy opening with something a little funny. And so there was this middle-aged woman, and she had a heart attack. And she was taken to the hospital. And while she was on the operating table, she had a near-death experience. During this experience, she sees God and asks him, "Is this it?" And God says no, and explains that she still has another 30 years to live. Well, upon her recovery, she decides to just stay in the hospital and have a facelift, liposuction, tummy tuck, and so on. She even has someone come in and change her hair color. She figured that since she's got another 30 years, well, she might as well make the most of it. So she walks out of the hospital after the last operation and is immediately killed by a speeding ambulance as it drives by. Well, she arrives in front of God and complains, "I thought you said I had another 30 years. And God replies, "I didn't recognize you." I thought it was funny too. Okay, so last month we started a series of talks that's based on Robert Brummett's book, The Quest for Wholeness, Healing Ourselves, Healing Our World. Brummett was one of my favorite teachers at Unity Institute, where I studied and obtained my Master of Divinity degree. Robert is an excellent writer. He's an excellent instructor as well, but he's very clear, he's very easy to read. And I think you will find his book to be an excellent guide for discovering your true nature, your soul, and healing aspects of your human self. I'm doing one talk on each chapter, and the truth of the matter is these chapters are very meaty. So I mean, I could do many talks on each chapter, but I'm just going to give you sort of an idea of each chapter, and what I'm hoping is that you'll, pick up the book and go dive deeper with the book. It's an excellent book. So to get the most of the series, like I said, I do suggest that you purchase the book. And also at the end of the book, or at the end of each chapter, he has exercises for you to do, and some affirmations, some denials, and some activities for you to just really help you go deeper into the material. So we have begun our quest for wholeness. A quest is a journey that requires inquiry, investigation, and exploration, which we will be doing together for the next few months as we do this talk series. As Brummett points out, most journeys have a destination, and our destination is wholeness. But what is wholeness? How do we find it? And is wholeness really a destination, or is it found within the journey itself? In my last talk 2 weeks ago, we learned that wholeness can mean different things to different people. To someone who is sick or injured, wholeness could refer to the restoration of physical health. To someone anxious and depressed or mentally upset, wholeness might mean peace of mind, happiness, or joy. If someone is experiencing relationship problems, wholeness could mean love and harmony in the relationship. If someone is facing poverty, wholeness could mean prosperity. So I think you can see, it's easy to see that one's vision of wholeness may depend on one's personal need. And Brummett says we can know wholeness only through personal experience. Wholeness, he says, is the natural result of living a spirit-centered life. It is the natural result of living consciously from the authentic core of our being. You know, one of our core values here at Unity Spiritual Center Windsor is spirit-filled. And for me, spirit-filled is the natural, personal experience of living a spirit-centered life, of living consciously from the authentic core of our being, and understanding that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Brummett writes that in the state of wholeness, we see all things from the perspective of our true nature. Just as all the planets orbit the sun, so everything in our lives revolve around our true identity. And this is the state of wholeness. So having identified and described our destination, which is wholeness, it would be helpful to have a map showing us how to get there. And we have a map, and that is what we're going to be exploring today. So we actually have what appears to be two maps because they use slightly different languages, but when we look at them closely, they both lead to our destination of wholeness. So we're going to be looking at a pathway to wholeness mapped by two great spiritual pioneers of the modern era. The most well-known is Dr. Carl Gustav Jung. He's regarded as one of the most influential psychologists of all time. He was absolutely brilliant. I've studied his work. He was a psychiatrist, a doctor. He created the analytical psychology methods, and he influenced religious studies, anthropology, philosophy. Just an incredible, brilliant man. The other one is Charles Fillmore, who is the co-founder of Unity. And both Charles and Jung were contemporaries. Now, Fillmore was 21 years older than Jung. And both Jung and Fillmore were very scientifically minded and voracious readers. So it's possible that they did come in contact with each other's works, each other's writings. If they weren't familiar with each other's works, they definitely were both tapping into the same inner wisdom. There's so much similarity there. And both Fillmore and Jung were considered mystics. According to Oxford dictionaries, a mystic is a person who seeks by contemplation and self-surrender to obtain unity with or absorption into the deity or the absolute, or someone who believes in the spiritual apprehension of truths that are beyond the intellect. Jung himself denied being a mystic. He also denied being an artist. But others, including myself, I disagree. Jung was a profound introvert. He built a tower on the lake where he lived in Switzerland, and he would spend hours and days up in that tower all by himself. And he admitted very few people into the precincts of that tower. Jung coined a lot of different terms that are used in psychology today, and one of them is the self with a capital S. Jung saw the self as the architect of wholeness in what he called the collective unconscious. Brummett defines Jung's concept of the collective unconsciousness as the dimension of the mind which is inherited by all human beings. This level of the unconscious consists not of personal memories and experiences, but those who have inherited, but all of those that we have inherited from the past history of the entire human race. And so in a similar fashion, Charles Fillmore spoke of a race consciousness and a race mind made up of the totality of beliefs, thoughts, memories, feelings, and experiences of the human race. So there's a big similarity there. Brummett goes on to explain that the collective unconscious of Jung consists of instincts and archetypes. Instincts are pre-existing patterns of behavior inherited by every human being. Let me give you some example. If you're walking out in the woods, and all of a sudden the snake goes right in front of you, what are you going to do? I mean, most of us are going to probably what? Freeze or jump back, maybe even scream. I don't know. But I mean, it's snakes. I don't care if you're Jewish or you're Buddhist or you're Christian or Hindu or Muslim. If you see a snake, most people are going to freeze. It's just a natural instinct to protect us. When I lived in Austin, I lived out next to this big open field in one of my homes, and so it was a big open field. So there were snakes that would come on the grounds every once in a while, and we have a lot of snakes in Texas. And there was one really, huge. Okay, it was a black. We called it a bull snake. It was a huge snake. And I was always running across it because, they eat, mice in the fields and things like that, and they're good for the land. But I always had the heebie-jeebies when I would go into my greenhouse and that great big snake would be there. And so I wasn't going to kill it because I just wasn't going to do that. But it still bothered me at times. And one day I had a mudroom off of my kitchen, and I had one of these storm doors on it, and the storm door didn't close it exactly. And I went out that door, and that great big huge snake had crawled up on the door and was on the door, and that great big snake fell on me. And I didn't just say, "Oh, you cute little snake." I didn't do that. I screamed. I'll never forget that. I really won't. So anyway, we do have these instincts, and snakes is one of them. And another one for me is like getting close to a cliff. You get close to a cliff, and you just freeze up. So we have these instincts that are at work in us. Oh, got carried away on that one. So Jung also used the term and defined the archetypes as pre-existing patterns of perceptions and understandings that are inherited by every human being. So this means that the archetype of the self exists within every human being as a pre-existing pattern. Brummett says the self is the essential nature of every human being. The self he said, is our spiritual nature. It is the archetype of wholeness. For Brummett, our life's work is to consciously bring this archetype into awareness and expression in our personal lives. And this is essentially the teaching of unity. In his book, Revealing Word, which is a dictionary of metaphysical terms, Fillmore defines the word self this way: Christ, the divine idea, is the true self of every man. Adam, the natural man, is the incomplete self. The fulfillment of self is accomplished as man puts on the Christ. So our life's work is to consciously bring this archetype, which Jung called the self, and which Fillmore defined as the Christ, into awareness and expression in our personal lives. Robert A. Johnson is a noted lecturer. He is a Jungian analyst and author. And in his book, Transformation, he describes it this way: the process can be summed up in one sentence. It is the relocating of the center of the personality from the ego to a center greater than oneself. This superpersonal center has been variously called the self, the Christ nature, the Buddha nature, superconsciousness, satori, and samadhi. So Jung called this process individuation. It's the process of becoming a true individual. This is the path to wholeness. In Unity, we use the term individuality. It was a term used and described in the very first book that Unity published back in 1896. That was just shortly before or right after Jung was born. That first book was Lessons in Truth by H. Emily Cady. It is considered one of the texts, one of the core texts of our Unity teachings, and is the most widely read book in our movement. So individuality and individuation come from the Latin word invidious, which means not divisible. Not divisible. In Revealing Word, Charles Fillmore describes individuality as the true self, that which is undivided from God, our spiritual identity, the God part of us, that which characterizes one as a distinct entity or particular manifestation of divine principle. Individuality, he says, is eternal and it can never be destroyed. On the other hand, as Brummett points out in his book, our human personalities are divisible. Our human personalities consist of many different components, and most of these personality components were developed as survival mechanisms when we were children. As personalities, we consist of many component parts, often unintegrated and sometimes in conflict with one another. The personality is highly divisible and fragmented. By contrast, the self, the individuality, or our Christ consciousness is undivided. It is whole, it's complete, at one with itself. In reality, it is one with all that is. It cannot be divided. Another meaning of individual is uniqueness. In our individuality, we are truly unique and one of a kind. There's no one just like us. Brummett says the personality believes that I am this or I am that. The individuality knows that I am. Only when we discover and express the self, our individuality, our Christ consciousness, do we become truly unique individuals. The work of individuation is to discover, experience, and express our individuality. Or as Charles Fillmore would put it, experience and express the Christ within us. In this way, we experience our wholeness. So individuation is the process of achieving wholeness, of experiencing the self. In another one of his books, Robert Johnson, who I quoted earlier, he did a book called He, Understanding Masculine Psychology. And in this book, he wrote, individuation is a lifelong process in which a person increasingly becomes the whole and complete person God intended him to be. It entails the gradual expansion of his or her consciousness and the increasing capacity of the conscious personality to reflect the total self. You know, we judge, the psychology of individuation shows that the goal of this process, Johnson says, of becoming whole is not perfection, but completeness. The whole person is never blameless, guiltless, or pure, but is one in whom all sides of himself have been combined inexplicably into a total person. Johnson goes on to say that this paradoxical unity of the self, which is like a combination of opposites, is a secret that cannot be rationally understood or comprehended. Unity is, so to speak, he says, a mystery known only to God. He said the ego can experience the unity of the self, but never logically comprehend it. So Brummett says that the process of individuation could be described as the reconciliation of opposites. The opposites refer to the opposites within ourselves. The human personality is not a monolithic structure. It's composed of many components and subpersonalities. These subpersonalities are usually paired in polar opposition to one another. We typically identify with one side of this pair. Normally, we are consciously aware of only one side. The other side is relegated to the subconscious, or what Jung calls the unconscious. We've got passive-aggressive, masculine, feminine, introvert, extrovert, parent, child, victim, victimizer, thinking, feeling. Brummett says we carry the drama of these and many, many other opposing forces within our consciousness. They show up in our lives in many ways. These oppositional forces readily appear in our everyday thinking, our inner conversations, our self-talk. You know, a typical inner parent-child dialogue could go something like this. I see a plate of donuts, and I think to myself, I really don't need those donuts, but they really look good. But I really don't need those empty calories, and I really don't need those extra fats or that extra sugar, but they really look good. But they really look good, and I haven't had one in a long time. And I mean, I don't eat very many donuts. I don't eat them very often. I just have them seldom, every once in a while for a treat. Well, I want to have one for a treat, and you have one for a treat. And then you say, I really shouldn't have eaten that donut. I really need to get off some of this weight. So, I mean, do any of you have these little dialogues going over in your head? Oh, yeah, I lost my way here. So anyway, but you do get what I'm saying. Okay. So Brummett says even a little self-observation reveals a great deal of inner conflict that is virtually continuous. And so, you know, we judge, we grade, we praise, we blame, and we ridicule ourselves endlessly. And this voice comes from the conditioned conscience, sometimes referred to as the superego. It is the internalized voice of parents, teachers, preachers, and other authority figures from our past. The other side of this pair may be the mischievous, rebellious, sometimes repentant child who wants nothing but to have fun and avoid responsibility. So Brummett points out that typically one side of each conflict resides within the subconscious level of mind. And this is sometimes referred to as the shadow side. We usually identify with one side of the conflicting pair, and then the other side goes underground into the shadow land. You know, for example, we may identify ourselves as mild-mannered and easygoing, and yet there may be another secret part of us residing in the shadow that is filled with anger and a propensity for violence. Normally, this part is well hidden from ourselves and others, but occasionally it may jump out and surprise us. And when this happens, we may apologetically say, that wasn't me, or I wasn't myself. You know, I think I've told you this story, but up into my 30s, I had this, I'm a very happy-go-lucky guy. I mean, I'm laid back, I'm polite, and I've been that way ever since I was a little kid. But there was a time in my life from the time I was a teenager all the way up until in my 30s, that if I bumped my head, I would go into a rage. It could just be a bump on the head, like a raising up and hit it on the cabinet or something. And I would come out with every curse word I could remember. And I would just, it was like, honestly, it was scary. It was like Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it wasn't until I got into therapy and saw a psychologist that after talking with him and everything, that I finally figured out what was going on. And that was that when I was a child, I did not have a good relationship with my father. And if I said something wrong, my father would slap me in the back of the head. He would just slap me in the back of the head. And as a child, I could not I couldn't be angry, or he would just, or he'd take the belt to me. I had to obey him. And so I just stuffed all of this rage, and every time he hit me in the back of the head, I just stuffed it deeper. And so as I got older, when I accidentally, like I said, from the time, I remember going berserk when I was a teenager whenever I hit my head. And all the way up into my 30s, after I was married. And but after therapy, I realized that I had just literally stuffed all of that rage within me because there was no way to me to let it out from my father. And once I understood that, I was healed. Seriously, I was healed. I can go and bang my head against the wall. I'm not going to do it, but it was, there's an old saying, to be healed, it has to be revealed. And I really had to dig deep with a psychologist to help me understand where all of that rage came from. So Brummett also tells the story himself. Oh, by the way, talking about shadow work, Dr. Ken Hart is a psychologist at Unity of Windsor, is a professor there, and he's also a member here of our congregation. And then Sean Sharkey is also one of our members. He's an ex-sociology worker. And they, every year, for the past 3 years, they have been doing some marvelous workshops and seminars dealing with doing shadow work, doing Jungian shadow work, and taking people very deep. And so if you haven't taken advantage of one of these workshops, I'm not sure when they're doing it. They just did one, I think, in February this year, but they likely will be doing another one. Anyway, if you hear about that, I suggest that you take the workshop. They do a marvelous job. So Brummett tells us that these hidden conflicts can surface in several arenas of our life. And a frequent battleground for conflict is the body, actually. Muscle tension, headaches, upset stomachs, and various stress-related ailments are usually symptoms of an inner war that's occurring within us. An injury or illness is often the result of a raging battle that's going on within ourselves. So Brummett tells his own story about back in early in his business, what he was doing, he started having headaches. I mean, massive headaches, to the point that he had to quit working. And these headaches went on for several years, and he was trying all sorts of things. And eventually, someone invited him to go on a meditation retreat, which is something he normally would not have done, but he went. So Brummett says that he had grown up. He had grown up Catholic. His mother was Roman Catholic, and his father was a fundamentalist Christian. But because to get married to a Catholic, you had to allow your children to be Catholic. So he grew up as a Catholic in the Roman Catholic Church, and he left the church at 20, and that was it. And he sort of became what he considered an agnostic. And when he started going in this meditation group and everything, some things started coming up, and what he realized is that his spirit, he had fought his spirit, he had had a lot of pain around his spirituality growing up, because his father had made fun of him being a Catholic, because his father didn't want him to have anything to do with being a Catholic. And so there was so there were some very painful moments in his life, and so after he started getting into this meditation and doing meditation on a regular basis, he eventually had this aha moment of what was going on in his life. And so he was really fighting his own spirituality, and he had repressed it so much, and that was caught. And once that aha came about, the headaches totally disappeared. He eventually discovered unity through a friend in the meditation group. He eventually became a unity minister. He eventually became one of my religious mentors himself. So suppressing, so our bodies, our relationships, or our finances may become mirrors for the parts of us that we've hidden from ourselves. What we do not see directly within ourselves will show up in our bodies or environments. Our lives provide every opportunity we need to meet and reconcile the conflicts that are within us. So Brummett tells us that if we are judging or condemning someone or something else, then we are most likely, unconsciously, judging or condemning some part of ourselves that is being projected onto the other. If we have an inordinate degree of fear about something, it may reflect something within ourselves that is frightening us. And if we have an excessive amount of adulation for someone else, putting them on a pedestal, we may be projecting our own disowned positive quality, and we disowned our own positive quality and projected it onto this other person. So this is the essence of psychological projection, is that we do not see a particular quality, either good or bad, within ourselves, so we ascribe it to someone else and then react as if it was all about them. So the self, the individuality, transcends the opposites that comprise the human personality. The personality sees with the eyes of duality because it uses or it sees projections of its own dualistic nature. The self only sees oneness because it is whole. It's undivided. It's in integrity with itself. The self, which I call our Christ self, is the force that will heal the conflict of opposing, of opposites that are within us. You know, there's a fable that tells of a time when the sun heard tales of great darkness on the earth. After hearing these stories many times, the son decided to go out and find out for himself. So he came to earth and walked to and fro across the entire planet, and he could find no darkness. Brummett says the personality sees healing as the elimination of the bad side of the conflict. The so-called bad side may be perceived within ourselves or within another person. If I could only get rid of this negative emotion, if only this person would change. The personality is always identified with one side of the conflict. It sees with limited vision, at best, only half the picture. The individuality sees that all conflicts is as two sides or two ends of the same rope. You can cut off the bad end and you still have two different ends. You can saw off the negative end of a magnet and you will still have a positive and a negative end. You can try to get rid of every bad person outside of you and every bad trait within you, and he or she or it will show up somewhere else in a different form. The individuality knows this because it is whole. The personality doesn't because it is fragmented. All healing is the transcendence of opposites. Wholeness is the product of balancing, reconciling, and integrating opposites. And please note, I'm not talking about destruction of opposites. That is not possible. The rope always has two ends. Healing occurs when we see that both ends belong to the same rope. Brummett says the movement toward wholeness always involves us in paradox. Our conditioned view is that things have to be one way or another, either this or that. Wholeness means living from the ground of our being that includes and transcends this and that. The personality cannot see beyond the divisions that it creates. The ego must surrender to the self, the divine within, in order to move beyond the limitation of separation. So every time the self, our true self, our Christ self is experienced, the ego is defeated. Brummett's book, The Quest for Wholeness, is full of wisdom that can help guide us on our spiritual journey to wholeness. And as I noted before I began this message, there's so much to cover in the chapters of his books that we can't do it in just one talk. So today I've only scratched the surface of this chapter on individuation. And Brummett is an excellent teacher and writer, and so my hope is that you'll use this talk to inspire you to explore his book on your own and allow him to guide you into a deeper understanding of the wisdom and the power that's within each of you. So as always, meditation and prayer form the foundation of our healing journeys. Working at all levels, physical, mental, and spiritual, is usually the best approach to healing. In this chapter, he also covers several techniques for self-awareness and healing, such as journaling and dialogue work and imagery work and dream work. And the purpose of each of these processes is to reveal that which is hidden and then reconcile and integrate that formerly fragmented and conflicting part into our personality in a functional and effectual way. So as opposites within the psyche, as our opposites within the psyche are reconciled, our identity shifts from the personality to the self, to our true self, to our Christ self. This is a process of individuation, and this is the journey to wholeness. Now let me lead you into our meditation. So I invite you to relax in your seat. Get comfortable. Take a couple of deep breaths as you relax. With each breath that you let it out slowly, just relax a little bit more. Let your mind become still. Any thoughts that might have come or might come about something going on later or something that went on before, we let those go as we bring our attention fully, totally, completely to this present moment. Our self is the source and the goal of wholeness. It is both the universal and the individual. It is both our uniqueness and our sameness. It's beyond opposites. It is both the center and the circumference of all that we are. The poet T.S. Eliot called it the still point. And this is what he said. At the still point of this turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards. At the still point, there the dance is. But neither arrest nor movement, and do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered. Neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point. There would be no dance, and there is only the dance. So I invite you to spend a little bit of time in the silence at that still point within you. So let's just spend a little time in the silence. So I invite you to bring your attention back to this room, and before we open our eyes, just think of one thing that you are truly, truly grateful for this day. Think of that one thing and just hold it in your heart and hold it in your mind and bless it. So we are grateful. And so it is. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend David. That was such a wonderful meditation. I really enjoyed that. I also want to thank you so much for that talk. It had so much in it. You always do so much research. I can't remember everything. I have to write it all down. So thank you again. It was just knowledge-packed and wisdom-packed.
Thank you.
Thank you. And also Charlene, thank you for your voice and your beautiful music.
Thank you.
It just brings us higher. It really does.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
And I do want to thank Leo over there who's doing our live stream. Leo, thank you. So it's time to look at our vision, mission, and statement of being.
We have a global vision. Will you please speak that with me? Our vision is
A world powerfully transformed through the growing movement of shared spiritual awakening. And we have a sacred mission. Will you say it with me? We inspire and empower spiritual growth to awaken us and transform the world.
And we have a personal statement of being. Will you please say that with me?
I am a dynamic center of the Christ light, mighty to unfold my good and radiate that good to all. And we have a few announcements.
Felt thanks for your continuous support. We've created many easy ways to donate, which you can find on our website.
And I also forgot to tell you that Lucy Croker is, just to remind you, Lucy will be upstairs in the prayer chapel for anyone wanting to have prayer. So we do have for those of you here, we do have a love offering box right over there at the entry from the foyer into here, and you can drop off any love offerings or checks there. And again, you are the ones that make all of this happen, and I thank you so much again for all of your support.
We invite you now to stand and let's open our hearts and minds in gratitude as we close by speaking out loud or to yourselves our love offering prayer, followed by the peace song and closing with the prayer for protection.
Divine love in me and through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as creator, family all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. Take each moment, give each moment, peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
The light of God surrounds us.
I am light.
The love of God enfolds us.
I am love.
The power of God protects us.
I am power.
The presence of God watches over us.
I am present.
And wherever we are, God is.
I am divine.
And my friends, you truly are. Thank you so much for being here. And please join us upstairs for fellowship.
Happy birthday to you, Linda.
Linda.
Happy birthday to
you.
Linda. Happy birthday, Linda.
Linda. Happy birthday to you.
And many more. Gotcha.
Matthew House. Is that building that's being built
let me see, who do you talk to? I think, who do you talk to? Is that Mary?